All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Torah Studies. Torah portion is Mishpatim, a Torah portion that I love. Why do I love this Torah portion?
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. That is correct. Thanks, Mom. Thursday night, Friday this week is my birthday. Yeah, well, coming up, not tonight, but Thursday night, Friday is my birthday. And Mishpatim is my bar mitzvah parsha. Yes. So this portion, I say it again. Pisces.
Oh, Pisces, right?
Yeah.
Are you upstream or downstream?
I don't know the difference.
Oh,
I don't know the difference, but I'll take whichever works better. All right, that's what I'm going to go with. So tonight we're going to look at the Torah portion of Mishpatim, but really more specifically, we're going to look at a story in the Torah that seems to be severely disjointed and out of place. And so let me explain which story I'm speaking of. I'm speaking of perhaps the most important story in Torah, which is the story of the giving of the Torah. Without that story, we don't even have a Torah to study. So it's literally, you would say, maybe the key story of all stories. It's the story of this story that we have in front of us. So like this book, the Chumash, the scroll and the ark, right? As I display it, a la Vanna White, the Price is Right. So like that, right? So the Chumash, the Torah, the ark with the Torah scroll, all of the above only exists with the story, with the narrative of the revelation at Sinai, the giving of the Torah, the Ten Commandments, etc. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at the story and piece together its fragments, because as we'll see tonight, it takes place throughout a number of chapters that are disjointed. Now, if you are familiar with the narrative of the Sinai experience, what happened at Mount Sinai, so you probably believe that the Torah portion that talks about the giving of the Torah at Sinai is last week's Torah portion, the Torah portion of Yisro or Yitro. And you would be right partially, because there is a second telling of the story all the way at the end of this week's Torah portion. And as we're going to see, that is going to raise a lot of questions, primarily the question of why is the story split up across so many chapters, disjointed, as it were. It comes to mind as I say this, and we're not yet jumping into it, but it comes to mind immediately, the idea that in the beginning of Genesis, Bereshis, we find two narratives of the creation of Adam and Eve. There's the chapter 1 story, where it goes through the 6 days of creation and then rolls into Shabbat. And as that story is told, everything seems like it's going well, right? There's no drama. There's no mention of sin. It says that God created Adam and Eve on the 6th day, and then Shabbat, and then everything was great, and God concluded creation. We say it Kiddush Friday night. All is well. Chapter 1 of Genesis, all goes well without a hitch, right? It's like the play, the movie, the live shoot. It all goes well. It all goes smooth. No flubs. No one forgets their line. No one veers off course. Second chapter of Genesis. Oh, we have a redo. We have another narrative almost. It's a second narrative of the creation of Adam and Eve. And this one contains the story of the sin. And there are many reasons why the story is divided into two different chapters. But in a similar way, we're going to see tonight the story, another seminal story, the story of the giving of the Torah at Sinai is also divided into two sections. So, Chumash, open up your Chumashim. And I know you guys don't have this, may not have this at home. Unless you have this one, then you're golden. But don't worry, I'm going to pull up the Torah Studies text either way. So open up the Torah to the Torah portion of Yitro, last week's Torah portion. And here, and I just want to show you, just want to map this out so you could see like visually and viscerally by turning pages as to how divided and fragmented the story is. So Torah portion of Yitro begins in the Chumash that we have in front of us, on page 395. There we go. 394, 395. Excellent. Okay, so 394, 395 is the beginning of the Torah portion of Yitro. And the Torah portion opens with the story of Moses' father-in-law, and he visits, etc. He tells Moshe about how to kind of reimagine the way that he judges the people. Chapter 19 of Exodus begins on page 400. So please turn to page 400. And I want to show you in the book, and we're going to read these texts soon in the Torah Studies text, but I just want you to see in the book for a second how this story is laid out. So chapter 19, again, page 404 and 401 in the English. So yeah, that's where the story begins. Continues on the next page, 402, 403. Continues on the next page, 404, 405, 406, 407. At the bottom of that page is the Ten Commandments. So what happened? So first we have the preparation for the revelation at Sinai, that we have about 25 psukim that talk about the days leading up to Mount Sinai. And then chapter 20 on page 406, 407, you have there the Ten Commandments, and that goes for another 14 verses. And then we read about the aftermath of the giving of the Ten Commandments, and that takes us to the end of the Torah portion.
So 14 statements, 10 commandments, 14 statements.
Yeah, 14 verses, 10 commandments, one low price. All right. So we're going to read some of this inside. The way we're going to do this is using I just want to be on the same translation. The translation that we have in our Torah Studies books, that Torah Studies book, is actually helpful. So let's read this inside text 1a. You know what? It's a very long text. I'm going to read it. So let me pull it up in the screen. You guys have the booklets. I'm not going to read it from the Chumash. Let's read it from the Torah Studies booklets that you guys have. And I'll read this out loud, and we're all going to be on the same page. Here we go. Okay. This is, again, chapter 19, verse number 1. And as I mentioned, it's the lead up to the Ten Commandments. Okay. In the third month of the children of Israel's departure from Egypt, on this day, which our sages understand to mean on Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month, the first day of the third month, which is Sivan. So on this day, they arrived in the desert of Sinai, aka the Sinai Desert. Okay, they journeyed from Rephidim, and they arrived in the desert of Sinai, and they encamped in the desert, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Ahar. Vayichan singular ki ish echad belev echad. They encamped as one person with one heart. Beautiful. Verse number 3. Moses ascended to God, and God called to him from the mountain, saying, "So shall you say to the house of Jacob," that refers to the women, "and tell the sons of Israel," referring to the men. Verse 4, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and I brought you to me. And now if you obey me and keep my covenant, you shall be to me a treasure out of all peoples, for mine is the entire earth. You shall be to me a kingdom of princes and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel." Moses came and summoned the elders of Israel and placed before them all these words that God had commanded him. And all the people replied in unison and said, "All that God has spoken, we shall do." And Moses took the words of the people back to God. So you see here, and this is a theme that we're going to see in the next, play out in the next several verses, is that Moses is like the broker. He goes up the mountain. God says, "Here, tell this to the people." He goes down the mountain, tells it to the people. The people say, "Cool." They respond. Moses brings the response back up to God, and the story repeats itself. Verse number 9, "And God said to Moses, behold, I am coming to you in the thickness of the cloud, in order that the people hear when I speak to you, and they will also believe in you forever." And Moses relayed the words of the people to God. Verse 10, "And God said to Moses, go to the people and prepare them today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their garments." Verse 11, "And they shall be prepared for the third day." What's the third day? Not the third day of the month, the third day from that day, which is going to be the sixth day of Sivan when the Torah was given. So I just want to pause here. We're up to verse 11, and I paused. I'm interrupting myself. Very important to note that the first 10 verses that we read are taking place over a few days. It's not all in the same day. The Torah very often does this. It kind of collapses narratives, and you're like, I don't know, how long? Like, what's the time frame over here? You read the book of Esther sometime. You read the book of Esther, it's like, what was that, a week? Meanwhile, it's like a whole year of a narrative, right? So sometimes you because there's no like timeline at the top of the page, so at the top of the scroll, I mean, but like so you don't. But this took place over a few days. So at this point, verse 11 is talking about probably on day number 4, where it says, "And they shall be." God says to Moses, "Tell the people they shall be prepared for the 3rd day." That means, I mean, day 4 is day 1, day 5 is day 2, and day 6 would be day 3. They should prepare for the 3rd day. For on the 3rd day, God will descend before the eyes of all the people upon Mount Sinai. That's going to be the revelation at Sinai. Verse 12, and you shall set boundaries for the people around, saying, beware of ascending the mountain or touching its edge. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. So, and this is a technical thing, the people were not supposed to get too close to the mountain where the divine was emanating from. 13, no hand shall touch it, for he shall be stoned or cast down. Whether man or beast, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long drawn-out blast, then they may ascend the mountain, meaning after the party's over, signified by a shofar blast. There were shofar blasts associated with the revelation at Sinai, and then another blast associated with the end of the Sinai experience. So when you hear the all clear, then you can climb up the mountain if you so desire. Verse 14, so Moses descended from the mountain to the people, and he prepared the people, and they washed their garments. He said to the people, be ready for 3 days, do not go near a woman. And that means it's a euphemism for intimacy, in preparation for no intimacy in preparation for receiving the Torah on the 6th day of Sivan. Verse 16, it came to pass on the 3rd day, when it was morning, that there were thunderclaps and lightning flashes and a thick cloud that was upon the mountain and a very powerful blast of a shofar. But that's the right. Remember, there's a shofar that says it's starting and a shofar that says it's done. And the entire nation that was in the camp shuddered. And now it fast forwards a few verses just for the sake of brevity, at least some brevity. Verse 20, God descended upon Mount Sinai to the peak of the mountain, and God summoned Moses to the peak of the mountain, and Moses ascended. So God came down, Moses goes up, they meet at the top of the mountain, and then we read about the 10 commandments. Okay, so that is all the preamble. Oh, there's a little bit more about reminding the people not to ascend. Okay, there's a few more verses of chapter 19. But again, we're not reading everything. We're reading most of it, but not everything. All right, then the narrative continues. Text 1b, like I mentioned, with chapter 20 of Exodus, which is the actual 10 commandments. And we studied first 2 last week. That was our focus last week on the first 10 commandments, which is found in verse number 2. But let's just go over this. Remember, we're doing this for a different purpose. We're not doing a deep dive into the content right now. We're looking at how the story is presented in the Torah. All right, here we go. The 10 commandments, verse number 1, God spoke all these words to respond. And verse 2, I am God, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, and all the people. Oh, sorry. Okay, so that's ... So 10 commandments, we fast forward. Here we go. Now we're up to verse 14, which I believe is a mistake. It should be verse 15. Yeah, I'm not wrong here. Yeah, verse 14 is marked incorrectly. Verse 14 is the last of the 10 commandments, whatever. It should be verse 15, that's a typo. Verse 15 says, and all the people saw the voices and the torches. So this is after the revelation at Sinai, the 10 commandments were uttered. So Torah tells us what had happened. All the people saw the voices, and by the way, saw the voices. Yeah, they somehow saw voices. It was like a sensory, everything was revealed. Even sound was able to be seen. People saw the voices and the torches, the sound of the shofar and the smoking mountain. And the people saw and trembled, so they stood from afar. Remember, they were not allowed to approach the mountain anyway. But here the Torah is saying, even if they wanted to, it was way too scary. It was way too much of an awesome sight to even try to get close. Verse number 18, the people remained far off, but Moses drew near to the opaque darkness where God was. Verse 19, God said to Moses, so shall you say to the children of Israel, you have seen that from the heavens I have spoken with you. Therefore, verse 20, you shall not make images of anything that is with me, gods of silver or gods of gold, you shall not make for yourselves. Basically, God's saying, you've seen the truth. Please don't revert back to idol worship. That's not true. Verse 21, And this is the last verse of last week's Torah portion, actually. No, it's not. All right, it's almost. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall slaughter beside it your burnt offerings, your peace offerings, your sheep and your cattle. Wherever I allow my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. And there's another 2 verses, and then the Torah portion, and then the Torah portion concludes. That's last week's Torah portion. Okay, so let's pause here for a moment. So in short, it's very important that we're all in this together. In short, last week's Torah portion tells the story of the Sinai experience. From when the Jewish people encamp at the foot of the mountain on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the first day of Sivan, through the days of preparation where God tells Moses instructions, he tells the people, he goes back up to relay the word and get the next commandment. He goes back and forth over 4 days, 3 or 4 days. Everyone gets ready. And on day 6, I am the Lord your God. And then as the Torah kind of wraps it up, the people saw, they trembled, and then there's some other details that are given, and then that's it. And so so narrative opens with the preparation, culminates with the revelation, and concludes with the aftermath. Closed story, right? Great. That's how it seems. And then this week's Torah portion begins, and this Torah portion, what about this week's Torah portion? How about that? It's called Mishpatim, and you can find it in the Chumash on page 416. It's right here, 416. 416, isn't that Toronto area code? Maybe it is. I think it is. My son's in Toronto, so it's cold. 416. Okay, so here we go. And our Torah portion begins. And I know you guys don't have it online, and it's not in the Torah Studies text either. But, just take my word for it, because I'm not making this up. So the Torah portion Mishpatim, as you guys can see with your Chamashim here, you guys can see that it's, there's a lot of laws here. Mishpatim means laws. God says to Moses, these are the laws that you should teach the people. Talks about slavery or servitude. The laws of, if you have a servant, you can't have them for more than 6 years. There's an embedded freedom that happens. Then the Torah talks about murder and manslaughter. I'm just going to read, honestly, there's like little captions in the margin. So I'm just going to turn pages and read the headers. On page 421, murder and manslaughter and killing of a slave. That means like someone murders their own slave, God forbid. 423, penalty for bodily injury.
Rabbi Ari.
Yeah.
Isn't it curious? They came the Exodus from Egypt. They got their freedom. Now they're talking about slaves already.
No, I think that's the point, though. I think the point is that telling us that everyone back then, it was culturally accepted that you had a slave or you had a servant. And the Torah is saying, now that you're free, right? You never hold a slave forever. By the way, the Haftorah of this week tells a story that happens toward the end of the First Temple era, when the Jews were not listening to this law, and they were keeping their slaves forever. And the prophet Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, Hanavi, he says to the people, guys, let's go. Let's end this. And the king said, Zedekiah, the king says, yes, let's emancipate the slaves. And then the people are like, actually, we want them back. And God says, look, if you haven't freed the slaves, I'm gonna free you from my protection. So look, it's a very human thing, at least back then, to have slaves/servants. And the Torah is almost saying, now that there's been, an exodus, don't do that. If you have a servant, it's only 6 years, it's not forever. Anyway, then it continues again to other things, that torts and damages, bodily injury, death caused by an animal. If an animal kills another animal or a person, God forbid. 425, a pit, damaging, somebody digs a pit and someone else falls in, right? An animal damaging property, one who steals livestock. Page 427, self-defense, payment for theft, damages caused by livestock, laws of shomrim, that means people that are guardians or bailees. 429 deals with a borrower. Then we have a section called seduction, talks about if somebody seduces a young girl and what his obligations are. 431, sensitivity to the helpless and abandoned. 433, the commandment to extend free loans. All right, Free Loan Society. By the way, this is a good time to mention, they're not a sponsor of the class, but a good time to mention JIFLA, the Jewish interest-free loan, JIFLA, Jewish Interest-Free Loan of Atlanta. Yeah, probably. Association of Atlanta. If anybody needs a free loan, that's the place to go in the Jewish community. It's a mitzvah, and it's a beautiful thing that they're doing, interest-free loans. 433, the commandment to extend, which is the free loans. Also 433, integrity of the judicial process. 435, fair dispensation of justice. The Sabbaths of the land and the week. 437, the 3 pilgrimage festivals. 439, the promise of swift passage to and conquest of the land. All right, interesting. That didn't really work out 40 years later. Anyway, so, and then that's kind of where we're up to for chapter 24. So just to give you a sense, from the beginning of Mishpatim to where we are, we started on page 416, Toronto. Now we're on page 441 or 440, okay? So that's like, how many pages is that? I don't know, a bunch of pages. That's like a pretty thick piece. And if we were to characterize it, it's a kind of like a potpourri of various laws that are taught. And yeah, all seems cool. Suddenly in chapter 24, because we had started the portion with chapter, 21. So we had 21, 22, 23, 3 chapters of Torah. It's a lot of verses in each chapter. 3 chapters. Suddenly in chapter 24, you'll never guess what happens. Talks again about Sinai. Let's read it inside. It's the strangest thing. I'll tell you what else is strange. No one, like, I don't know. I think when we see it, we're like, oh, that's weird, and just move on. It's like we never stop to think about it. Like, what is going on? We read about that last week. It almost sounds like it picks up the narrative again when it totally doesn't make sense to do so. So let's actually read what happens in chapter 24 of Exodus. Let me pull this up. Again, I'm going to read this because it's a bunch of verses. I'll throw a little bit of commentary in there. Yeah, chapter 24. You see, chapter 24 of Exodus, verse number 1. And this is after the laws of slaves and torts and damages and cows goring other cows, all that stuff. Suddenly the Torah says, and to Moses, God said, come up to God, you and Aaron, Nadab and Avihu, and the 70 of the elders of Israel, and prostrate yourselves from afar. What are we talking about here? God tells Moses, come up to God. Come up where? Verse 2, and Moses alone shall approach God, but they shall not approach, and the people shall not ascend with him. What does it sound like? It sounds like the mountain narrative, right at Mount Sinai. We read that last week. That was like 4 chapters ago. Verse 3, so Moses came and told the people all the words of God and all the ordinances, and all the people answered in unison and said all the words that God has spoken, we will do that. We literally read that verse last week. And Moses wrote all the words of God, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 monuments for the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent the youths of the children of Israel, and they offered up burnt offerings, and they slaughtered peace offerings to God, bulls. And Moses took half the blood and put it into the basins, and half the blood he cast onto the altar. And he took the book of the covenant. What's that? Book of the covenant? Wherever fine books maybe are sold. He took the book of the covenant and read it within the hearing of the people. And they said, all that God spoke, we will do and we will hear. That's the 3rd time we have that response from people. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. Wow. A little gross. And he said, behold, the blood of the covenant. I'm sorry, just calling it as I see it. Behold, the blood of the covenant that God has formed with you concerning these words. And Moses and Aaron, verse 9. And Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel ascended. Verse 10. And they perceived the God of Israel, and beneath his feet, God's feet, was like the forming of a sapphire brick, and like the appearance of the heavens for clarity. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand, and they perceived God, and they ate and drank. Wow. Don't even know what's going on here. I'll be honest. And God said to Moses, verse 12, come up to me to the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets, the law, and the commandments, which I have written to instruct them. So Moses and Joshua, his servant, arose, and Moses ascended to the mount of God. And to the elders, he said, wait for us here until we return to you, and here Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a case, let him go to them. He's in charge. Famous last verse. And Moses went up the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain, and Moses came within the cloud, and he went up to the mountain, verse 18, and Moses was upon the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And just so you know, that's the end of this week's Torah portion. That's the last verse. Verse 18 is the last verse of our parsha. Now, the obvious question, okay, there's a lot of questions. First of all, what did any of this mean? Like that narrative that we read last week, at least makes sense. It talks about the days leading up to Sinai. It talks about the giving of the 10 commandments, or God speaking the 10 commandments. And then it talks about, how that experience felt and the aftermath. And then we have the first, 3/4 of this week's Torah portion, which are a bunch of laws, like rapid fire. Boom, 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 boom. Mitzvah, mitzvah, mitzvah. Is there a count? Maybe not in this chumash. Some chumashim have which mitzvahs are in which Torah portion and how many are in. Not in this one. Whatever. They have a bunch of mitzvahs in this week's Torah portion. And then at the end, it circles back to the narrative. So a few questions. Question number one, why is the narrative of Sinai divided into two? That doesn't make sense. If any of these verses were relevant to the story, just say it last week. What's going on here? But maybe more importantly, got to ask another question. The verses in this week's Torah portion that speak about Sinai and going up the mountain and altar and sprinkling blood on the people, when did that happen? What are we talking about here? Did that happen? Well, hold on. Let me ask you a question. Based on the order of the Torah, did this happen before the 10 Commandments or after the 10 Commandments?
I want to know when they had the party.
Yeah, they ate and drank. What is it? So when did any of this happen? When did this? All of these verses, chapter 24, the whole chapter, it's 18 verses that talk again about the mountain, Mount Sinai. When did chapter 24 happen? Chronologically, when did it happen?
It's either a summary of the first time it happened, or this literally happened again, this exact.
Okay. All right. So Ramon is saying, logically, we would say one of two options. Either it's just going back to the previous narrative and say, totally forgot to tell you about these few details. Or perhaps this is stuff that happened after.
It almost sounds like it happened after the Egel. This is what we find after the Egel.
You didn't even read about the golden calf. Yeah,
no, I know. That's what sounds so strange.
When did this? In other words, if we're giving dates, the first day of Sivan, they arrived at the mountain. Day 2, whatever. Day 2, day 3, day 4, there was preparation. Day 5, they were getting ready. Day 6, right? Shows on, curtains open. Ta-da! Divine revelation at Sinai. When does chapter 20? That was chapter 19. Right? When does chapter 24 happen? Or sorry, chapter 19 was the preparation. Chapter 20 was the 10 Commandments. 21, 22, 23 are the laws, Mishpatim. Chapter 24 again, Sinai. When did this happen? What day? Day 7? Day 8? What are we? Is it a rehash?
It had to happen after, because in the first instance, they were very scared of the presence of God, and they kind of couldn't stand it. And here it's most of the same stuff happened, except this time they went up and they were able to perceive God, and things were okay. And God did. So
there's a little bit of a different angle on it. Okay, mm-hmm. So there are different commentaries because it's very confusing. There are literally different opinions. Some commentaries explain that chapter 24 is talking about what happened after the 10 Commandments, after Revelation at Sinai. This happens the next day Moses went up the mountain, but this is after 10 Commandments, and it's chronologically after the events of last week. However, and this is where it gets very interesting, Rashi says everything in chapter 24 is actually, or most of chapter 24 is actually happened before the 10 Commandments. In other words, this is filling in this chapter, the end of this week's Torah portion, is filling in a little bit of additional detail that was left out of the lead up to the 10 Commandments that we read in chapter 19. You with me on this? You have chapter 19, preparation for Sinai, chapter 20, revelation at Sinai, 21, 22, 23, random, other mitzvot, chapter 24. Oh, totally forgot to tell you what happened in chapter 19, filling in some more details about what happened. Now, where does Rashi say this? Well, you guessed it, the very first verse of chapter 24. Let's take a look. Okay, we'll read this for ourselves. Okay, text 3a. Ramon, please read text 3a and then 3b. Text 3a is again Exodus 24:1, the very first verse of that very odd chapter that rehashes or something the narrative at Sinai. Please read.
And to Moses, God said, "Come up to God, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and prostrate yourselves from afar."
Now take a look at Rashi 3b. Here's what Rashi says.
And to Moses, God said, "Come up." This section was said before the Ten Commandments. Moses was given the instruction, "Come up," on the 4th day of the month of Sivan.
There you have it. According to Rashi, chapter 24 takes place on the 4th day of the month of Sivan. Mind blown. Mind absolutely blown. Emoji. See what just happened? We have chapter 24 of Exodus, the end of this week's Torah portion, and it seems like strange, for lack of a better term, because what are we even talking about? We already read about that last week. Rashi says, true. This is filling in gaps in the narrative that weren't told to us about the 4th day. The 4th day, God says, you should be to me you should be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And he also said the contents of chapter 24. Strange, right? Very strange. Which leads to a number of questions. Okay, it leads to a number of questions. Question number one, the basic question is, why does Rashi say this? There is a notion that the Torah is not necessarily written in chronological order. The truth is, I should say, let me qualify that for a second. There's a dispute in the Talmud whether or not the Torah was written necessarily in chronological order or not. The accepted opinion is the opinion of the one who says it's not necessarily in chronological order. You could find things that are out of order. I don't mean broken, but I mean out of literal order. Take a look at the Talmudic text that expresses this. Merle, please read text number 4 from the Talmud Tractate Pesachim, page 72.
Rab Menishaya bar Tachlifa said, in the name of the Rab, there is no chronological order of earlier and later in the Torah.
So here we go. Ein mukdam mucha Torah. There's no chronological order, which means, now just to be clear on that, it means that not necessarily, just because you read something earlier versus later in the scroll, does it mean that it happened earlier and later. So you could have something that's written later that happened earlier, and I guess Rashi would say that this is one of those cases where what we're reading about 3-4 chapters later actually happened earlier, because we read about day 1 of Sivan, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, revelation at Sinai. Then you have all this other stuff, and then we're back to day 4. So according to the way Rashi would have us understand it, the Torah here is not going in order. Now, if you're thinking, that's impossible, it's possible. It happens. But that only leads to another question. Why? It's possible, but why? Why would the Torah have split its narrative in such a bizarre way? Why would Rashi seek to understand that the Torah split up its narrative in such a bizarre way? You could conceptually explain, as other commentaries do, that this narrative in our Torah portion is talking about the moments after the 10 Commandments, that somehow God calls Moses back up the mountain, and there's other things that are happening and whatever. There is a way to see it that it happens after the 10 Commandments. Why does Rashi insist? No, this took place on day number 4. Remember, Rashi is always trying to give us the most straightforward approach. the most straightforward approach is not necessarily to say that the order is like all over the place. In this context, in our situation, Rashi is clearly telling us that the events of chapter 24 are taking place on day 4 of Sivan, which is before the 10 commandments were given. So it seems bizarre. It seems weird. On every level, it seems weird. Why is it, if it's one continuous narrative and this is actually taking place before, then why isn't it there? Why does the entirety or the first 3/4 of Mishpatim, this week's Torah portion, why does it interrupt in the middle? What is happening? If you want to even think about it even more, let me add to the question. I'm not going to try to confuse anybody. I want to add to the question. The reason I say confuse is because you have to kind of take a large view, a broad view of the book of Exodus. What's next week's Torah portion? Truma. And then Tetzaveh. What is Truma Tetzaveh? It talks about the mitzvah, the commandment to build the Mishkan, to build a home for Hashem. What the Mishkan looks like, what was inside the Mishkan, that's Truma. Tetzaveh talks about the garments of the Kohanim, right? What they should wear, what it should look like, how to make it. And then we have Kitisa, more instructions about the Mishkan. And then you have, in the middle of that third Torah portion, the sin of the golden calf. Can't we just tell the story normally? Can't we just get an actual? Where's the book of Genesis when you need it? The book of Genesis was told in a narrative fashion. We just had a story. What's going on here? Tell me the story. And by the way, the book of Exodus also started strong. We were slaves. God tells Moses to say to the people, it gets worse. Then the plagues start. It starts getting better. Exodus, splitting of the sea. Everything seems to be moving. Then we should read about, we got to Sinai, we got ready, we got the Torah, Moses went up the mountain, he comes back down the mountain 40 days later, they're worshiping the golden calf, that's a problem. God says, if you want to fix it, here's build the Mishkan.
Honestly,
that sounds like a great way to tell the story. It's split up now. As I said, I'm not trying to add questions, but I am adding questions. It's now split up into 3 different sections. We have preparation and Torah giving last week. We have at the end of this week, we have, here's what happened on day 4 that we didn't know before. And then 3 portions from now, we have what happens 40 days later. And it's all confused. I'm going to tell you the answer. Yeah.
All that God has spoken you shall do. So that's va and na'aseh v'mishpat, right? Na'aseh v'mishpat?
That's na'aseh.
Na'aseh
All that
v'mishpat.
God says we will do is na'aseh. All that God says we will do and we will listen and we will hear and we will study, that's na'aseh v'nishma. So 2 times the people just say we will do. I mean, the people are reported to say we will do. 1 time we will do and we will hear.
Actually, Genesis also has these motifs where it seemingly restarts 1:27 and then 2 and 7 and then 5 and 1. It's 3 different accounts. It's okay, well, God created man. So
Right.
you can actually sort of see these motifs
Right. So there are instances where the same stories are kind of overlapping in different places. Good, right? Even in Bereshit, even in Genesis.
Right.
But even if the Torah could do that, you would think there's a reason for it. And the question is, what is the reason for it? And Rashi is the one that's telling us that this is happening. So how's he understanding it? What's actually going on? So I want to give you, again, bigger picture that we're going to get into the text. Bigger picture understanding of what's going on. There are actually 2 parts to Sinai, which is why it's divided into multiple narratives. Part 1 begins last week's Torah portion, Yitro, with chapter 19, and ends toward the end of this week's Torah portion with chapter 23 of Exodus. So it begins with preparation for Sinai, revelation at Sinai, 10 commandments, the aftermath, and all the Mishpatim, all those laws. That's part 1 of the story. Part 2 of the story begins chapter 24 of Exodus with going back to day 4. I understand it's going back, but that's part 2 of the story, not chronologically part 2, but conceptually part 2, which goes into Truma and Tetzaveh, the building of the Mishkan. and then kind of concludes over there. Let me explain what the part 1 and part 2 is. Remember, part 1 and part 2 doesn't mean chronologically, time-wise, it means concept-wise. There's 2 concepts that happen.
There were 2 different people before.
Yeah, also, but there's two things that are happening. The best way is to give an analogy. Let's say you get you buy a new appliance. The appliance I'm gonna pick is a dishwasher. Okay, you get a brand new dishwasher, and they deliver it, and they pull out the old dishwasher that's no longer working, and they put in the new dishwasher, and they install it, and then before they leave, they hand you an instruction manual, and you say thank you. I have a simple question for you. If you read the manual and follow the instruction, well, let's assume you can understand. If you read the manual and you follow the instructions, are you building a relationship with the installer? That's a weird question. No. Are you building a relationship with the manufacturer, like a relationship? No. Right? Bosch, is that a company?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bosch?
Yeah.
Right? Are you closer? Are you now like, are you like friends with Bosch? What does it even mean? Or like Samsung. I'm like buddies with Samsung. Because I followed the instructions, and that's again, you just follow it. Look, good for you. Like whatever. Follow them, don't follow them. There's 2 ways to understand. There's 2, not ways. There's 2 things that happen at Sinai. Thing 1 is that God gave us an instruction manual for life. God says, hey, I know I created mankind a little while ago, like 2,448 years ago, like almost 2,500 years. But I feel like y'all have been missing a manual. So y'all trying to just figure it out on the fly. I'm going to make it easier for you. I'm going to give you a manual. It's called the 10 Commandments. It'll then be fleshed out into the Torah. And here, this is the best way to live. Great. Cool. Either do it or don't do it. I mean, like, is anyone going to come after you if you don't put the that blue liquid into your dishwasher? What is that? The drying thing situation? You know what I'm talking about? That like extra, like I put in the detergent, but there's that blue stuff. Like, I don't know. It ran out. I didn't realize. Oh no, what's going to happen? I don't know. Either it works or it doesn't work. No one from the company is going to like, it's not, I'm not, there's no like, so then I'll get a new one. Like whatever, I'll figure it out. There's one level of Torah, which is, it's a manual. Do it, don't do it, whatever. It's a manual. And if you do it, you'll live a good life. You make the world a better place. Great. There's another dimension of Torah. And that is that it's about a relationship with God. This is absent. I know people that buy Apple products feel like if he was still alive, they would be best friends with Steve Jobs. I know that. I'm kidding. I'm not picking on Apple. I'm just saying as I do this for my MacBook. But like, I know there's a tendency to like get really into like certain products. But that's why I went with the dishwasher, because I don't know that anyone that's that into their dishwasher that feels like if they follow the manual, like somehow they're like this with the manufacturer. I don't think that's the case.
Because it's not cool.
Because it's not cool, because it's just a dishwasher. So it's kind of like the second element of Sinai is that God says, oh, by the way, I'm not just giving you an instruction manual. I'm also creating a relationship with you. I don't want you, I'm not just giving you something to do and see you later. Like I'm just giving you a guide and like, I don't actually need to talk to you anymore because I told you what to do. So I think I'm done here. No, on the contrary, God wants a relationship. Listen to this. Listen to about to like detonate the bomb, the mind bomb. Here it goes. Chapter 19, 20. Talk about the preparation and the 10 commandments and then the giving the 10 commandments. 21, 22, 23. 5 chapters. They talk about the Mishpatim, the various laws. All the same point. Here are the laws. Go for it. live a good life. Great. If you hurt someone, you got to pay up. Comes along chapter 24 and says, oh, one more thing. One more thing. You and me, we're connected. And when you keep these laws and live this kind of life, you're not just optimizing your human machine, but you now are you're building a relationship with me. Unlike Bosch, who doesn't care. Trust me, they'd rather you neglect the machine and buy a new one in a year. Trust me, right? All Bosch reps, don't come after me, right? But like, honestly, sure, God says, oh, one more thing. Do this and we're connected. Not just do this and then we're connected, but I'm giving this to you, not just for you to live a good life, but because I want you to live a godly life. Because by following what I tell you, now a new thing happens. You're not just following the manual, put rice in the rice cooker, press start. That's not all that's happening. You're not just making rice. I know I switched appliances, don't worry, I'm not unaware, right? You're also now connected with the author of the manual, the creator of life. If you look, and I guess we could look, or you just take my word for it and look it up soon, in the interest of time. If you look at chapter 24 of Exodus, it talks about covenant, 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 blood being sprinkled, the book of the covenant. It's all about the relationship. Rashi says, by the way, this happened day 4, meaning this was a part of the Sinai experience. Wait, so why didn't we read it then? Because the Torah wants to divide out the 2 objectives. There's 2 objectives with the giving of the Torah. Number 1, practically to know what to do to live a good life. Number 2, to live a connected life with God. Those are 2 different things. To highlight the difference, the Torah literally separates the narratives, even though they happen at the same chronological time. The Torah separates it out into 2 sections. Section 1, part 1, chapter 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, the Mishpatim, the do's and don'ts, the manual for life. Put rice in, press start, add water before you press start. Whoops, forgot that, right? Boom. Chapter 24, this is about the covenant. 25, 26, 27, 28, build me a home that we can live together. The Mishkan. You see what happens? Those are the 2 narratives. Oh, and then we blew it up the golden calf. Fine. But before the mistake, there's 2 different narratives, which means if someone were to ask you cold, so you got the Torah, what's it all about? You say, well, there's 2 points. Number 1, it's a manual for life. And number 2, it's a connection to the divine. Those are 2 separate objectives. And to highlight that they're different, the Torah divides the narrative into 2. It's magnificent, it's incredible, and it's what Rashi is telling us based on the Rebbe's genius perspective. Let's read this inside, and then we're going to close out the class. All right, take a look at text number 6. Wait. No, it's text 7. I'm going to read. Text 7. The giving of the Torah. By the way, if you think this is a genius way to understand it, it is. Literally not my way of understanding it. I'm just communicating the Rebbe's Sikha, the Rebbe's talk. All right, from 1983, I believe. The giving of the Torah achieved 2 objectives. First, God gave the Jewish people the commandments and laws of the Torah. That's point number 1. We got the manual. Second, through receiving the Torah, the Jewish people became God's servants, as the verse states. You will serve God on this mountain, which roughly refers to the idea of a relationship. Text number 8. The account in the Torah portion of Yitro, last week, focuses primarily on the giving of the Torah and its commandments, the 10 commandments. Therefore, the account of the preparations for the giving of the Torah focuses on the commandments given to prepare the Jews for this event, abstinence and keeping a distance from the mountain. In other words, it's about a technical telling of the story, and therefore we read about the technical preparations. By contrast, the account in the Torah portion of Mishpatim in chapter 24 focus on the second aspect of the Torah, the covenant between God and the Jewish people, through which the Jews became God's servants. The covenant was forged through the series of actions described in this account, the people's accepting the Torah by saying we will do and we will hear, writing the book of the covenant, the construction of an altar, sacrifices, and sprinkling blood. It's not about what to do and how to live a good life. It's how to be connected with God. And as I told you before, the narrative continues right after that with the building of the Mishkan and creating a home for God. And I need to tell you this. If you look again at Rashi's words, let's take a look back at the text 3b. Look at Rashi's words. He's so precise, it's actually scary. Take a look what Rashi writes. And to Moses come up, right? Chapter 24, verse 1, on the first verse of this weird section, Rashi comments, this section was said before the 10 Commandments. You know what Rashi's telling us right there? This section about the covenant, about the relationship, was actually said on day 4 before the 10 Commandments. In other words, which comes first, the relationship or the laws? It's actually the relationship. God is basically saying the reason why I'm giving you a manual is because I care about you. Again, Bosch is giving you the manual probably because they have to, or else they'll get sued. You didn't tell us what to do, right? It's probably just like a legal issue that they have to write up an instruction manual. God, this section is before the 10 Commandments, meaning Rashi is intimating, Rashi is hinting that Hashem wants us to be connected. And therefore, he's giving us the best way to live. Moses was given the instruction, come up on the 4th day of the month of Sivan. Come up, meaning come to me and be connected with me. And so, my friends, in conclusion, we have 2 elements of Torah. Number 1, Torah is a great do and don't. It's a great guide for living. It tells us what to do. It tells us what not to do. It tells us how to live our best life. But in addition to that, Torah also tells us how to have a relationship with God. The very same Torah, the very same thing that we do or don't do based on God's command, not only helps us live a good life, but it also puts us in a relationship with God. And again, that objective drives the first point. It's because God loves us and wants to be close with us that he gives us something to do. He gives us a commandment because he wants to be in a relationship with us. This is the genius of the dual narrative. So we asked the question, we said, why would the story be split into 2? Well, maybe it's chronologically after. No, Rashi says it's the same earlier chronology. So why is it divided into 2? Well, it doesn't have to be in chronological order, but why would it split it up into 2? Now we have a good answer. The Torah is telling us that there's 2 points. One is pragmatic and one is relationship oriented. The message for us, the takeaway message, I think is obvious. When it comes to Torah and mitzvot, there's 2 meditations that you can have. Number 1, by following this mitzvah, I am living my best life. Number 2, by observing this mitzvah, I'm doing what God wants and thereby strengthening my relationship with him, with God. Those are 2 separate things, 2 completely different narratives, different points. They're both true. By doing this thing, I am living my best life. And by doing this thing, I am connecting with God. That's the dual meditation of every mitzvah. Take it a step further. I don't know if it's a step further or a step laterally. The same thing is true in every human relationship, right? There are things that we do in a relationship. We can either do it in a sense of, well, it's what I'm supposed to do, because, it's the right thing to do. Or we can be doing it from a sense, it could be either an item on a checklist, or it could be something that we're doing to foster, further, to strengthen our relationship and our love with the other that we're building a life together. 2 different objectives, 2 different realities.
Too. If you love, you'll do those things.
Oh, and that's what Rashi's saying. I want to be in a relationship with you, therefore you're going to do these things, not because there are checklists to do, but this is what constitutes a relationship. So my friends, this is a new way to look at every task that we have. All the checklists in our lives are, whether they're the divine checklists, or whether they're, eggs, milk, and whatever our lists look like. There's 2 ways to understand it, right? Your spouse hands you a list. Say, hey, do you mind stopping at the store? Or sends you a text with a list. Do you mind stopping at the store on the way home from work? Sure. There's two ways you can think of it. Either, oh, I'm buying eggs so that we can make omelets, or I'm helping build the relationship. This is helping build the relationship. So which one is it? Both. How do we know that there's two? The Torah very clearly separates them out. It's magnificent. The second objective is building a home together. Truma Tetzaveh, the Mishkan, building a home. The first one is Mishpat, looks like Mishpatim. Do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that, right? So the first narrative is followed by do this, do that. The second narrative is followed by, oh, build me a home. I know, that's not the song. All right, make sense? Man, nothing like Torah. Seriously, nothing like it. Nothing like dishwashers and rice makers also. But who's counting? All right. What was it? Mitch Hedberg, great comedian. He's like, rice is great if you're looking to eat like 1,000 of one thing. All right. Anyway, if you know, you know. Good. Questions? Comments?
Nifla.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Torah.
Excellent.
Torah and Coca-Cola. It's the real thing. Huh? Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. That's it. Oh, announcements for this week. What do we have? Tomorrow is the Talmud class, part 4, which is magnificent. Mario Lemieux from Montreal, French Canadian hockey player. He's become Le Magnifique. Did I pronounce that right? The Magnificent. Talmud is Le Magnifique. How do you pronounce it? Magnifique. Magnificence. That's Tuesday, Thursday. Oh, if you're not yet part of this Tanya Thursday night with Rabbi Freeman, OMG, it is incredible. You're hearing from a guy who's literally writing a new book on Tanya, and he's teaching it as he's writing it. This is unheard of. Imagine you could, just trying to find a parallel in Lahavdil. You know, imagine if J.K. Rowling would be writing Harry Potter, and like every week in Starbucks, you have a chance to meet up, and she'll tell you about the chapter development. I mean, this is like what's going on here. It's craziness. Give some input. Yeah, make it into the final book. Make it into a footnote. All right, that's Thursday night, 7:30 to 8:30. What else? Yeah. All right. Who knows? Oh, we're doing another book launch in a few weeks for a third book. We've done a few like once each month now. What else are we doing? It's the book Letters, the book that I helped write, Letters for Life. Yeah. Yeah.
Listen to the podcast.
Which podcast? With the author?
Yeah.
Levi Shmutkin? Oh, she interviewed him? So nice. That's my boy. All right, good. All right, so more information. Oh, and we're also launching a parenting and grandparenting course starting next month. Yes. I'm doing it with Jessica Kreitzek. So we're going to be co-present. Yeah, this is breaking news. It's happening. Yeah, she's like the head of Atlanta Conscious Parenting. Okay. Too much to talk about. All right, let's close out, and then I'm gonna. Okay, questions, comments. We're good. Amazing. All right, we'll see you guys. Lila Tov. Hope you enjoyed.